Okay. Oh boy, what a way to start off. Okay, so all right, we had number of shareholders in our actual class, but I just wanted to fill in some additional information, which is we learned that the key number is 100, but family members, and after all, S corporations were designed for small businesses, uh, particularly family businesses, but doesn't have to be. But family business is certainly one of the traditional small businesses of America. So for a family, it turns out that the descendants of a family, that is children, grandchildren, great grandchildren, etc., all the way back up to grandparents, you can have up to 6 generations of family members holding stock. That's a lot of years, so it's pretty hard to imagine a situation where it's 6 generations. You can do the math. Pretend you are the parent. You're the first generation. You have a son. That's the second. Then then a grandson. You just do the math. Grandson, great grandson. You'll find it's like great 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 grandchild child or daughter that you can have as a shareholder in an S corporation. And none of these count as more than one shareholder. That's the key. None of these family members will count as more than one. So all the family members could hold stock. You could have hundreds of family members if they fall into this calculation of within 6 generations, hundreds of family members, and they all count as one. So that allows a family business to get a lot of grounds of bringing in outside, non-related, or cousins of people who are not within the immediate family as shareholders and not mess it up by the number of family members. So what it means is you could wind up with a situation with many, many shareholders as long as the ones that are family count only as one, which is what they do, and the outside this family, quote unquote, lineal descendants, is that's what it is, lineal. As long as the shareholders outside do not take it over 100 by having 99 outside shareholders. Actually, to take it over 100, you'd have to have someone should have caught me on that one. You'd have to have 100 outside shareholders, because then you'd have 101. Get the picture? I hope you do. Also, by the way, spouses count as family members, so that's pretty good. If you ever run into a situation with stepchildren, check it out. I think they work too, but don't quote me on that. Okay, that's the main thing there. Now we spoke about the fact that since the corporation, the S corporation in this case, does not pay tax, it's a pass-through. It passes through its income to the shareholders, and the shareholders pay the tax. And we also talked about when we allocate it, we have to allocate it exactly in proportion to the percentage of shares owned. This is a repeat of what we did in class. Now, there is another aspect to this pass-through, which is really, really cool, in particularly with startup businesses, but there could be a number of cases where it's really cool, and that is the following. Suppose you have the S corporation calculate its net income, and instead of coming out with a net income, it calculates it to be a loss for the year. That happens in startup businesses. It can happen in any business at any time in its life, of course, but typically a startup business would have a loss. Hopefully not too long, but it's possible. Since the S corporation is a pass-through, that loss passes through to the shareholder vis-a-vis that K1, you'll remember. And the result is really, really cool. The shareholder could possibly use the loss on their individual return when they go to prepare their 1040 individual income tax return. So I say could possibly use the loss. And that's where we're getting to some new information here, which is really as I said, it's really cool. How many times did I say cool? Some student should count it up and get back to me, and you'll get a prize. All right, so here's the deal. What can happen is the following. The S corporation generates this loss. It passes through to the shareholder. And on the shareholder's 1040, they have a salary from maybe a working spouse, and it's got income. But the loss generated by the S corporation gets put on here, and you know what? Now your net income, instead of being 2x from the salary, it's minus 1x from the pass-through of the S corporation, and so the net income that's taxed is only 1x. That's what's cool. So the shareholder, when it was a C corporation, the C corporation had losses, didn't help the shareholder. It might have been a loss that could have been carried back 3 and carried forward 5 against other income from the C corporation. But here, this is a situation where the net income, if it's a loss from the S corporation, actually goes through the pass-through to the shareholder and can help them. And when I say help them, I mean help them reduce other taxable income, as in this example, so they wind up paying less tax in the year of the loss. That's cool. Now, before we leave this, we have a couple other points to bring to your attention, and that is the following. First of all, we talked about the fact that in the pass-through entity, we said that if the pass-through entity, the S Corp, shows a gain of, let's say, $100, the taxpayer picks up the income and pays the tax. This is year 1. In year 2, the S corporation, let's stay with the same. The S corporation in year 2, you should remember this, decided that after year 1, even though the income got picked up by the taxpayer, the cash did not get paid. So we'll use the cash as being in blue. So here it held the cash, and in year 2, the corporation in year 2 takes the cash and gives it to the taxpayer. So now the cash is here. This cash has already been taxed here. So when it's received in year 2, we spoke about this in class, but when we receive it in year 2, it's not taxable because it was already subject to tax in year 1. When the S corporation distributes the money, distributes the income that it made, is up to the S corporation. It can be any time. How do we keep track of that is where I want to go next, and that's through what's called, and it's not because, and I am going to actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's got me in the mood to take a drink. I'm pouring the drink. Now it's water. It's water. It's really water. So the fact that I might sip it slowly doesn't mean it's anything other than water. See? Water. Okay. Why did this remind me of taking a drink? Because we have an accounting of how to know whether or not we have, like in this slide, whether or not we have, when we receive cash, what we have to do is we have to have an accounting on this side, meaning the taxpayer side, as to when do we have income when we receive cash. Because how's the taxpayer going to know whether when they receive the cash, what if it's 10 years later instead of year 2, it's year 10? How's the taxpayer going to know whether that is taxable or not? And that's where I'm going to go with here. And you'll see why I remembered to take a drink. We call the accounting a AAA account. Not the Automobile Club, but accumulated something or other. That's why I'm drinking. It's the accumulated adjustments account, the accumulated adjustments account. And what it basically is it's tracking the pluses and minuses. It tracks the income, which is a plus that a taxpayer picks up on their return. It will subtract the losses. As we just learned, losses can be taken against the individual income tax return. And so it will keep a running total of what we've got in the taxpayer shareholders overall pass through from the S corporation, such that if they receive a distribution of cash, they'll know whether or not they've already paid tax on it. Because if the distribution, as we saw in the other example, if the distribution they receive in some years $100, and the AAA account has $100 in it because of the accumulation of plus income minus losses, if the net came out to 100 when the $100 was received, it tells the taxpayer that, hey, I've already paid tax on this $100 I'm getting in cash, even if this is, say, year 10, and the income was back here in year 1. The AAA account keeps accounting so that a taxpayer knows whether or not the cash received is taxable. Now, what does that mean? How would the cash received be taxable? Well, it's possible that the corporation's liquidating some appreciated asset or something. It's liquidating something, and it's got extra cash above and beyond the income that the taxpayer actually paid tax on in the past. So that what happens if the AAA account is, let's say, $50 in year 10, and now the taxpayer picks up $100 cash. So the way to do the math, you should figure this out, is the first 50 is a return of the accumulated adjustment account, and that's not taxable. All right? Not taxable. But meanwhile, they got $100 in cash, which means there's $50 left over, not accounted for. So what happens to the other $50? That's a return of principal above and beyond the AAA account, and then you have to see if there's basis in the stock that the person had. Maybe the person bought it for $50, but you'd have to see whether this is going to be subject to capital gain or not. Okay, and this is getting complicated, so I think we'll pause here and we'll pick it up on the next tape, next recording, and I think in the next recording I can do a good bit to make this less complicated.